The views and comments expressed on the following radio program by its hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect the views of rmconair.com or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Knowledge of self.
Radio.
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 Peace. Welcome to the Knowledge of Self radio show. My name is Teray Allah. To my left.
Peace, Jarul Allah.
And we would like to welcome you to another show of the Knowledge of Self radio show. Why don't we go ahead and get into the discussion at hand. Today we're going to be talking about fear, so I would like you to take a moment to think about what you're afraid of or what do you fear. So one of the things that we all agreed, at least our collective, is that when you come into the knowledge of yourself, you overcome your fear of a variety of things. And I can say just for one, when it was revealed to me that we only have one chance in this life to live, in other words, it's just one life, and after that, the cycle ends. So the first thing that I had to overcome was my fear of death. Okay, so that's one of those things that's inevitable. So we will be talking extensively about how fear affects us, phobias, but more importantly, what are some of the tools of fear? So before we begin, let's get into the current events. And I want to hand it over to Jarul, and I'll pick it up from there.
Yeah, peace. So for those who are presently unaware, there's been a kind of a silent movement going on as it relates to the legislators in California. And what they're really trying to do is make it damn near impossible for midwives to practice in the state of California. They're actually putting in and striving to put in different laws that would require them to be under harsh supervision and basically make it impossible for women to have the choice to have children at their homes or not. So for this is very important because everybody's always talking about the right for a woman to choose whether or not she wants to have a baby at all. She should also have the right to choose where she wants to have that baby. So, so if you want to actually get involved in this movement and strive to block it and stop that actual law from coming through, you can go to a website called findyourrep.legislature.ca.gov. So you can go there and type in your zip code in your area and figure out what legislative body is in your area and what representative to contact. And then based on that, you can call them, visit them, and just basically harass them so that, they can see that you're not going to sit back and let this thing go through. Another, if you want to get more information on the whole law, actually it's the law is, or the bill is AB 1308. So if you could Google that. If not, just go to www.com, CA families for midwives.org. So
just based on your experience, what are the benefits of the midwives? Because I've at least had one student. Yes, can you believe it? I've had at least one student that said that they would like to be a midwife when they graduate from high school. They want to be trained to be a midwife.
Well, my young god, my son, was actually born at home, and for me, in my perspective, looking at my black woman and how she felt about the whole birthing, situation. She just felt more a level of comfort and control at home, being at home, as opposed to being in a hospital. I'm not going to go get too long-winded with it, but there's some simple things that they don't do at the hospital that they allow you to do at home. For example, they have you laying in a bed pushing, right? When, common sense would say you should be standing up or be in a position where gravity actually helps affect the birthing process. So you have that liberty at home. You have like birthing stools, you have tubs and things of that nature, and you just have the ability to go from room to room and walk around. You're not just restricted to staying in that bed and having some stranger staring you in the face.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah,
that's
so
deep.
the level of comfort is definitely important.
And you don't have to worry about someone taking your child and replacing them with someone else.
Right, you have that. You don't have to worry about them sneakily trying to, vaccinate your child behind your back without your supervision and those types of things. So, that's just a handful of things that you can be, I guess, more at liberty when you're having the baby at home, So, and also it was just a great experience. It was. Just to see that whole science manifest itself, it was real peaceful. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that.
Oh, true indeed.
Another current event. Some of you may have heard about the shooting on Friday that took place at Santa Monica College. It actually started off campus. They identified the suspect by the name of Samir Zawari, who was 23 years old, a former student of Santa Monica College. And just to make a long story short, he apparently carried about 1,800 rounds, and it wound up taking about 5 people's lives. And also, I heard a report on my way here from KNX 1070 radio, that said that the young lady by the name of Marcella Franco, whose father was a groundskeeper at Santa Monica College, was taken off of life support system. So we just want to say peace to that family.
Peace, definitely.
And, it's really unfortunate that now that Congress is debating gun laws, we really do have to take responsibility as citizens just in our daily lives. So, for example, if you know someone that is having some issues, whether they be mental, and that's strongly rooted in emotions anyway, you need to be that person that guides them to get help. And people who are having some issues, there are plenty of agencies out there that you can go to and work out your problems. So don't sit there and act like you're alone, and then all of a sudden you want to lash out and take innocent people's lives, for whatever the reason may be.
One thing I wanted to mention, and this kind of relates to both the whole the bill and laws for the midwifery as well as the laws for guns, is the laws are only going to affect the law-abiding citizens. Individuals who are going to practice midwifery without a license aren't going to be affected, by these laws. These are only going to affect the laws that are or affect the people who are law-abiding citizens. Same thing with the guns. Individuals who buy their guns legally and have their licenses and things like that, the laws that they're proposing are only going to affect those individuals, not the individual who's going to get his gun off the street and handle his business that way.
Yeah,
Right.
no doubt. And to add on to that, in fact, there was a Supreme Court ruling that just recently passed in Chicago, dealing with that same thing. How they were saying the citizens are the ones who will be held responsible for having a gun in a gun-free zone, whereas the criminals are outside of that, and if they have a gun, it's cool for them to have it.
Right. And another thing I wanted to mention, which to me seems a little suspect, down on Friday, the day before the actual shooting that went down in Santa Monica, there was downtown. There was actually terrorist exercises that they were going through. So they were going through different mock exercises that, in case terrorism went down in downtown, how they would deal with those types of things.
Right.
So I find that interesting that occurred the day before, as well as Obama coming here that same day. So
no doubt.
Seems fishy. That's all.
What else is also something interesting is every time they have these mock what if something happens, something seems to happen.
Something happens, right?
Right. Wow.
And when that happens more than once.
The society we live in today,
Yeah.
I wanted to pass over the next current event to Jaquil. He's going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on with Verizon. So.
Yeah. So as you guys know, or as you guys should know, Verizon just recently in the news has been willingly giving over all your information to the government, specifically the Obama administration, because they're the ones who are really in the forefront of this. And I find that interesting on many levels. This guy is a great understander and insight of the Constitution and its laws and how that should operate. And this is definitely an infringement upon that. And for all intents and purposes, he said, he's giving it the green light to go ahead. So in any event, they're basically handing over everyone you call, all your text messages, all your keystrokes, anything you're doing on your phone to the video game you're playing, everything is being copied and recorded over. Yeah, so they definitely know who you are and what it is that you're doing.
Right.
That's crazy, because when you think about that new Xbox that's coming out.
You add on about that.
Yeah, man, they're going to make it so that you have to be online at all times for the most part. And they have a thing where the Kinect basically scans your profile, scans your facial features and all the different things. And that goes into a database that's accessible to the government and these individuals.
What is the point of that?
to better protect you
when you play a video game.
Right, you just want to play the game, right?
Kind of like the witch told Hadel and Gretel, right? Go ahead and eat this food. It's all good.
So I would really like to see this before we vote for some of the people that are writing these laws. We would like to read your background check and look at your psychological history before we vote you into office. Why don't we put a spin on things, since the government is supposed to be run by the people?
Right, exactly.
But in any case, why don't we go ahead and last mention the annual show and prove, the Nation of Gods and Earths. We have an annual gathering to commemorate the fact that Allah is not dead. And we have that every year in the city of New York. So I wanted mainly Jarul, because you have attended and we know the history, but I wanted to kind of give it to someone who knows a little bit about it. Can you speak on that for a couple of seconds?
Well, not without getting too deep into it. It's just a great experience as far as just meeting people that were around in some of the most turbulent times in our history here in America, and just basically giving their experiences of how things went down, when they were alive in the 60s, when they were coming up in those times, and just getting the history from them. I'm a big fan on just talking to older people and just getting their wisdom on what experiences they went through that got them to the point where they're at today. So that was the biggest thing that I did when I was there. But, there's various different events that go on, and it's mainly for the youth, and they have like a science fair and things like that for the youth. So it's definitely a great experience. So,
Right. And I was building with Life about that yesterday. It really is meant to be an opportunity for youth to exhibit what they know. And I know some of the videos that have been put on YouTube or sent to us shows quite a few youth who are, displaying their science projects, and it's really an incredible experience, So Those of you who are near Show and Prove, if you have the opportunity, check it out. And I would like to say peace to the gods and the earths who come together and put that important event together every single year.
Yes,
so we're going to go ahead and anyone else want to add on?
Oh, no, I just want to say peace. Definitely peace to the gods,
indeed.
peace to the earth.
Peace. So we want to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the topic at hand, fear. Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Welcome back to the Knowledge of Self radio show. My name is Teray Allah. To my left.
Peace, Jarulullah.
Peace. Jakil Knowledge Allah.
Great. And we're going to return into our general discussion, which is about fear. This show is brought to you by Global Positions Solutions. You can contact them at globalpsolutions.net. What's your position? If you'd like to call in and share some of your thoughts, the number here is area code 323-965-1600. Again, 323-965-1600. Let's begin with a quote, and the quote is from Tupac Amaru Shakur. And it says, "The same crime element that white people are scared of, black people are scared of. While they waiting for legislation to pass, we next door to the killer. All them killers they let out, they're in that building. Just because we black, we get along with the killers. What is that?" So when we go into this topic, we are going to talk quite a bit about original people's fears, but in general, what quite a few Americans are afraid of. And actually, I think we're talking more about the condition of our mentality as human beings, and what are the roots of fear.
That's a real quote right there.
Right.
I was just building with a friend at work, and basically we were talking about black, and basically it came down to like a black and white thing. And
I remember you telling that.
Yeah, so he was kind of mentioning how they got rid of the white police chief and they got a black police chief, and so that was better for black people. And we had two black police chiefs, and he was like, see, that was better for black people. And I was like, well, here's the thing that you're failing to realize. How many times, he's Italian, so I was like, how many times have you been pulled over for being Italian? How many times have you been pulled over because of the neighborhood that you live in? And the answer was none to both of those questions. And I was like, so these are things that continued for our people. So that's a real fear as far as, being black in America and being in certain neighborhoods.
Yeah, man, and it's, when you think about black cops, man, usually they're the most, hardcore.
Man, they go hard.
Yeah.
What did Cube say? Black police showing out for the white cop. Yeah, check that song out. All right. So today's questions. What is fear? What is the root of fear? How is fear born? What is the amygdala? What does neuroscience reveal the root of fear is in the human body? What is the difference between a fear and a phobia? This will be an interesting discussion in a moment. How are they similar or different? What does research show that people fear the most? What entities, which means people, places, or things, creates a culture of fear? Can fear ever be positive? Think about fight or flight in your psychology class. And number 7, what do original people fear in America? Why? And how does knowledge of self help one overcome their fear? And I think the last part of that question is really the most important question. How does knowledge of self help not only us, but other people that have come into the knowledge of themselves overcome fear? So why don't we go ahead and get into our discussion at hand. And over the course of the show, we'll be making quite a few references to several articles. So the first part of this is titled The Science of Fear and Phobias. So why don't we go ahead and look into the definition of fear. Jakil, would you mind reading the definition that we agreed upon?
Yeah, indeed. So what we came to agreement on as a working definition of fear is an emotional reaction to external and internal stimuli rooted in a previous experience or an unexpected set of circumstances.
Right. So in essence, one thing that I wanted to begin the discussion with is, first of all, what's the difference between a fear and a phobia? And are we born just naturally afraid of things, or is it something else? So in essence, what is the root of that fear? So I'll just kind of I'll make the first comment before I let you two go on. I'll give you an example. I like spiders. Okay, but I don't keep them in my house as pets, but I pretty much leave a spider alone. Of course, there was a black widow in my medicine cabinet a couple of months ago. It kind of surprised me, but I just killed him and that was it. Other than that, I let a spider do his job because I hate flies more than I do spiders. And now, when we want to talk about fear, I don't fear spiders. I have a phobia for roaches because I had an experience as a child when I was growing up in Gardena, where I opened up a box of cereal and, roaches came out of it. So even to this day in my adult life, anytime I see, I'm sorry about that, but
that's
anytime
that Ghostface song, real life, huh?
Plucking roaches out the cereal box.
Man.
Watching Saturday cartoons.
I haven't even heard that, but that's a black reality if you're living in certain areas, man. So now to this day, when I see the cereal bag, not closed, before I pour the cereal, I'll hold it up because you have clear bags. I just hold it up and shake it and look inside of it just to make sure I don't have any bugs.
See, under that circumstance, that's not a bad thing, though. You learned a lesson. Now you a little bit more observant. Now, if you stop eating cereal altogether, never again would you ever touch cereal.
Right.
That's when it's a little bit overboard.
Or if you wigged out every time you saw that the bag was open.
Right.
And then you're like, okay. No cereal.
You don't do that, right?
No. Now, the guys, they had a really interesting debate about this, as always. And I wanted them to break down the difference between fear and phobia. So let's go ahead into the discussion in terms of what is fear, and then we'll bring it back and try to figure out how that is different or similar to a phobia. So who would like to make that knowledge born first?
All right, so I'll just jump in. So as far as I see it, a fear is a reaction to a stimuli that's actually present and real. Whereas a phobia is a reaction to a unreal stimulus. For instance, if I say, hey, there's a lion in the room, look out, and there's no lion in the room and everyone flipped out like, there's a lion, right? That'd be a phobia, right? You're reacting to a fear of something that's not real, not present. The stimulus isn't there. Versus if there's actual lion in the room and I say, yo, there's a lion in the room, and it turns around, you're right? Okay, so obviously you may be a little afraid unless you're a lion tamer and you whip out your whip or something. Which I don't know why you'd be carrying a whip, but in any event, right, that'd be more of a fear as far as I see it. Yeah,
when you look at the origin of the word, phobia, it actually comes from Greek, and the actual, origin or the etymology of the word it means fear. So phobos, I think the actual word is phobos, and that actually means fear. So, they go hand in hand, basically. I see what you're saying as it relates to, phobia being more of an unreal situation, but that fear could be the same thing. It could come from something. I think fear is just the result of whatever stimulus, and based on your perspective of a certain circumstance or stimulus, you could lead to that fearful result, you know. So it's just, I think fear is more of a mind state, but not like that one movie that just came out with Will Smith, and that their whole campaign was about danger was real, or danger is very real, but fear is not real. Something under those pretenses, but it's basically, you know, danger. Yeah, we know that's a real situation. Fear can result from danger, or it could just be a situation that you create in your mind. Or actually, it is a situation you create in your mind, because it's just about your perspective of that danger. How am I gonna
respond to the situation at hand?
Right. Am I gonna let it debilitate me, or am I gonna react in a situation that actually helps my circumstance and situation? So
right.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you say that. I just watched the movie The Crows.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new anime movie that just came out, and a big part about caveman and how yeah, no doubt it's about caveman.
Wow.
It's a cartoon about caveman.
Okay.
Yeah, it's deep. You should really watch it, especially those of you who have knowledge of self.
You got
120. Yeah. It's a dope flick. In any event, the first part of the movie, they spend really talking about fear, how the caveman survived based on his fear. So anything new, right, that was bad, right, be afraid of that. Anything in the dark time, right, be afraid of that. Fear, that's dark, that's bad. So anything relating to fear is something to be afraid of. So basically, they start the movie off like that. It's the girl talking, and she's a redhead, which, if you guys are into that science, right? Yeah. So that's deep within itself. In any event, so they start that movie based on all these things they're afraid of, stamping it out, and this is how he survived. And then through the end of the movie, or towards the end of the movie, spoiler alert, you know, he begins to break that fear, and they go to venture out and find. Basically the Garden of Eden. It's real deep. They follow the sun to get to this great, beautiful place. Yeah, it's deep.
So it's interesting how when we talk about phobias and fear, we have something called homophobia. So that's obviously fear of gays. Now, where does that come from? If you've never had a bad experience with someone who is a homosexual, why is it that you would fear a homosexual? Now, I mean, because we have to ask ourselves, we are the owners of our own fear and phobias, but they all have a root. And of course, some people will have to be a little bit more personal with others, but what's the consensus in terms of how you all see it? I mean, why are people homophobic for the most part? Is it a bad experience? Is there something innate within us that makes us fear homosexuals?
All right, well, I know Jerul's probably going to drop something deep on y'all. So real quick, I would just say fear sometimes is not a bad thing. You know what I mean? Fear can be healthy as long as it's not debilitating. You know what I mean? Because of that kind of stressful situation, like some people say, I work better under stress, right? And that's when they do their best.
Right.
But our engineer Keys just raised her hand up. Right. And so at that point, fear is not a bad thing. Now, when you're scared of something, and like you said, there's no, like, I don't know. I'm not homophobic, personally. I'm not scared of any gay dude or a gay female for that matter. But yeah, I don't know where the root, I'd say that just comes from television and programming. You know what I mean? People just having,
I think,
a bad understanding.
Definitely that. I definitely think there's instances where people are fearful of homosexuals, but I think a lot of that homophobic, in the term homophobia, it's kind of like one of those things that are kind of pushed out there, like, don't be that, like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like a political stance almost.
Right. And so anything that you say against it,
you're labeled a homophobic. Exactly.
Right. All right, well, we'll let you decide. What are you afraid of? So in essence, when we come back from our break, we're going to get into a little bit more of a discussion about what people are afraid of, especially in America, and then we'll go into the roots of fear in original people. So please stay with us. Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Welcome back to the Knowledge Yourself radio show. My name is Teray Allah. To my left.
Peace, Jarulullah.
Peace. Peace, Jakil Najala.
And before we left, we started into our discussion about fear and talked a little bit about phobias. Now, why don't we begin this segment listing the 5 things that Americans fear most? And more importantly, this is a question that we all pose for these particular fears. Are these fears that encompass all races of people in America? So you'll have to ask yourself that question. The first fear that most Americans are supposedly afraid of is the nuclear programs of Iran and North Korea. This is tied for first. International terrorism is second. Islamic fundamentalism is third. The economic power of China and the military power of China. So how does everyone see that? I mean, are any of these relevant fears in your life? Because they're not in mine, but...
Yeah, I mean, when you look at all of these things, it's clear where the actual root of the fear is coming from, and it's directly connected to the media. Because as soon as you turn on the news, you're hearing about Iraq and Iran and North Korea and the nuclear warheads that they have.
And Dennis Rodman.
Dennis Rodman, like, then you got the terrorism and the potential terrorism and this and that. So, the media is really what's creating that fear, and they feed off of that to get us to obviously react and act a certain way.
Right. Right. I think that's a good case of the manipulation of fear,
right,
to where fear is used against you as to it being a motivating factor to get you to do something,
right. And you always have some strangers dictating who your enemy is, and that also creates a culture or a climate of fear. Okay, so let's move into the next part of this, which is the roots of fear in original people. So what we want to talk about, and hopefully many of you will benefit from this, is what are some of the tools that are used against original people to keep us afraid or in fear? And we can go really way back in history and tell you some of these tools, but we'll keep it on a more of a surface level. But for the most part, let's begin that. First of all, we have to understand that fear begins not only before we are born, and then it progresses when we become children. And if we don't overcome certain fears, then we carry those with us into adulthood. I wanted to share the idea of how fear is embedded in the consciousness, but we're going to have Jakil build on that a little bit more. So how is it that fear can be embedded in our conscience, and where does that come from?
I think one example, kind of to give you guys a foundation or a base point of where that's coming from, is there's something called the collective consciousness, and that there was a study, not necessarily a study, but what happened is there was a group of monkeys who were in a laboratory, and they taught those monkeys sign language.
Okay.
Now there was another group of monkeys in the jungles in Africa, completely far away, untouched by these other monkeys, just observed by man but from a distance, so they had no direct interaction. They observed that these monkeys also started learning sign language out of nowhere without being taught, and not having any kind of cross communication with any other group of monkeys or human beings. So science then kind of went into the theory of collective consciousness and groups having their own kind of collective consciousness. So where an animal in one part of the world learns that something's bad, it'll be in that collective consciousness so that an animal in another part of the world can access that and know innately, okay, I shouldn't mess with X, Y, Z.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to our propaganda show, that ties right into Edward Bernays and his whole teaching. He understood that there is collective consciousness, and if we can sway, by we I mean government, we could sway.
Got to preference that.
Right. They could basically sway the collective consciousness in a fashion that is, I guess, beneficial to the infrastructure.
Wow.
And that's why when you look at the nuclear programs, Iran, and all these different things that, are the top 5 things that Americans are fearful of, they're using these things to control and sway the perspective of Americans.
Wow. So fear is basically my take on what you both shared is that fear is learned, and as long as we're taught that, we will continue to be afraid of some things that really we shouldn't be afraid of.
Right.
One of the things that came out in our study was the idea that fear actually can be transferred to unborn children when they're in the womb. And there's an interesting source for this. It's titled psychcentral.com. And you can find that, and it's titled Emotional Trauma in the Womb by Samuel Lopez de Victoria. So one of the things that came out is that whatever a mother of an unborn child reacts to, that in sense can be transferred to that of her child. And they classify this as metabolic cascade. So anytime a mother's anxiety goes up or she's fearful or scared about something, for example, Jerul said that when a dog barks and a child jumps, but that child has never had a bad experience with the dog, well, why does it jump? So there's an origin from that. There's a strong possibility if you ask a woman who hasn't given birth yet and is pregnant, quite possibly they have some apprehensions or some fears dealing with animals. Mm-hmm. So when her anxiety level goes up, it's called metabolic cascade. It's an interesting study also.
No doubt. That's why it's important when you're pregnant, just like I'm not personally pregnant right now.
I was getting ready to say, okay, let's explain this, Chief.
I mean, science is able to do that apparently.
Right.
I don't know if y'all heard about
Man.
that. That's a whole
That's
nother
another
topic.
show, man.
Yeah. In any event, when my woman is watching certain things on TV or something happens and she'll kind of get excited about something, I'll be like, yo, babe, you got to calm down, because that definitely gets transferred to the child, and you don't want to have that baby coming out with certain kind of fears or, you know what I mean?
And one of the things the article said was trauma. You know, if you're exposing yourself to, I hate to say it, an abusive relationship. Ooh. So if you're pregnant and you know that your partner is abusive, whether they be verbally abusive or, of course, we know physically abusive, you shouldn't even be with that person anyway. But if they're emotionally abusing you, you're creating this anxiety and in turn trauma. And later on, you're going to see the outcome of that when the child is born.
Right.
Okay.
That goes kind of back to a show we had on homosexuality and dealing with the hypothalamus, right?
Right.
So how does this trauma transfer into childhood experiences, Jerul, just from what you were studying?
Well, I would just say that, when you really look at it, the fear coming from the womb is not necessarily a bad thing. If you look at it like from the standpoint of, okay, the mother is teaching the child what that child should be aware of, or be, in a stance of conscious of when the child is brought into the physical world. Generally, if you look at it from that standpoint, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you see a child grow up and that fear is causing them to be restricted from, I guess, reaching their true highest self, that's when it becomes detrimental.
Right. Kind of like, so it's like you're saying the response to the fear.
Right. Fear itself to me is not necessarily a bad thing, because with fear, I think, comes awareness. But I think... Potentially, right? But the actual result of that fear, is it causing you to stay stuck where you are? Is it keeping you from reaching your highest self? Then that's when that fear becomes detrimental.
And I really like how you made that last statement about how fear can prevent you from reaching your highest potential. One of the things that we encourage everyone to watch, a virus called Fear. One of the psychologists was talking about how fear can be overcome if we use critical thinking. And we have to be careful that if we don't raise our awareness, then what we're doing is we are overriding our cognitive skills with fear. So before we tap into that I guess they would call it primal fear, you have to think and be aware of what's going on around you. So it's not enough for me to say, hey, some guy has a gun outside. It's like, okay, so that's the first thing I have to ask myself, for real? Okay.
Right. Really?
Okay, now I'm aware. Okay, so then I will have to evaluate the situation as opposed to just breaking into a panic, you know. Interesting stuff. Why don't we go into the next part of this, which is getting more into what original people are afraid of. And I think many of us, part of me, we're going to go into how religion plays into our fears and how is that used as a tool to keep us afraid. So I do want to mention this to people who read the Bible or read the Quran. Pay close attention to how many times the word fear is used and the context that it's used in, because what we were exploring in our research is how religion is used to keep people in fear. So why don't we take it from the top? How is fear built into religion? So Jaquil is going to take us through that.
Indeed, peace. So I would say the first way it's built in, or that you really see it apparent, is just the whole concept of heaven and hell. You know what I mean? And so you've got that built-in fear factor already from the jump. If I do this, it'll be bad and I'll go to hell. If I do that, it'll be good and I go to heaven.
Right.
So I need to do good things because there's someone over me who's watching, keeping tally on a little board, score sheet. Right? And if I mess up, you know, I'm going to be damned to eternal damnation. So,
Right.
And I heard hell is hot. At least according to DMX.
Right. Right. Okay. And also in terms of the idea of the hereafter or afterlife, I think most of us who attended any type of religious organization or were a part of a religious culture, we were always told that there's an afterlife. And again, this was the first thing that was explained to me and I had to come to grips with when I came into the knowledge of myself, which is that, you know, you have one opportunity to live this life, this cipher. Eventually it's going to end and you're going to return to the essence. So, I mean, honestly, I wanted to burst out into tears. I mean, but it was the truth. But it's like, wow, I only get one shot? Okay, so then you have to make a decision about how you're going to live your life. Either you're going to be insane and try to do all these types of foul things in the name of fun and living every day to its fullest, or you're really going to come to grips with what your goal is in life and how important it is for you to, you know, lead the right way of life. So how did all of you draw that up in terms of how does this idea of the hereafter and the afterlife play into fear in people?
Well, the way I look at it, man, you can really live forever. It's just really about having children first and foremost, you teaching them all the lessons that you learned so that they have that in them, and then when they have children, they pass it down. To me, that's how you live forever. So, you
No
know,
doubt.
when you have your seeds, really take time with them. Make sure that, you know, first and foremost, you recognize maybe some of the things that you didn't do so well when you were younger, and make sure that they don't make the same mistakes. You know, provide them with the foundation that they need so that, you know, they can be better than you.
No doubt.
You know.
Yeah, it's ill. I mean, you know, my son, which was on the show once, you know, he's 12 right now, Knowledge Wisdom. So watching him kind of go through his life, it really, I kind of see myself, kind of like all the same things that I went through. And then I flash back even farther to my mom telling me, like, yo, nothing that you've done is new. So any kind of lie I tried to slide through, I already done it, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of ill. And so I see what you're saying as far as teach your kids to do those things that you missed, because they do kind of, in so many ways, relive your life, right? And so it's that attempt to make it better. So I agree 100%. Yeah, you definitely can live forever.
Right.
Now, we talked about the laws as well, and as far as the laws in our society, that's one of the primary ways that our people are kept in fear, people in general. So what I would like to do is when we return is talk a little bit about how laws have been used and they're still being used to keep original people in fear. So when we come back, we'll talk about that. Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Welcome back to the Knowledge of Self radio show. My name is Teray Allah.
Peace, Jarulullah.
Peace, Jaquel Knowledge Allah.
So let's talk a little bit about the laws, what we have deemed as white society, and how those laws are being used to keep original people in fear. So, Jarul, you want to go ahead and tip this off for us? How do our laws use to maintain a sense of fear within our people?
Well, the two that stand out to me most specifically are the one in Arizona, I want to say, where brown seeds or Mexican Americans, I guess by law enforcement, it's legal for them to, profile. If they see somebody driving and they're a brown seed, they can just tell them to pull over and ask them for their papers, to show and prove that they are actual citizens. So
Right, some Nazi Germany type stuff.
exactly, exactly. So, even people who do have their papers, they're driving around and now they have to be weary of being pulled over and harassed about those types
Just
of things.
because.
Right. And the second one is the stop and frisk situation there in New York where, you could be a black and brown individual walking the streets, minding your own business, but the cops could just stop, frisk you, check you for your different identifications and things like that. And, that's legal right now. So
Right.
that's obviously going to cause you to be fearful. You don't want to go outside because you don't want to be. Because think about it, you get stopped and frisked, you're almost, what's the word, emasculated? So, no man wants to feel that way, so. I think-
Better just post up in the house. then.
Exactly.
Right, and what about the National Defense Authorization Act? I mean, how does that play into our everyday lives in terms of the way that government is using laws? And, I know one of the things that they can do is that if you've been charged with a crime or you've been suspected of a crime and let's just say you're documented, right? But you are originally from what's known as an enemy state, you can be locked into a camp specifically for people who are waiting on trial to be brought up on charges of, terrorism or any number of things. So how does the National Defense Authorization Act play into people's fears, original people's fears in this country? Let's say if you were Persian.
Well, I think one thing that's important, or at least I want to say, is a lot of these laws were things that they were already doing. You know what I mean? And then they were just like, okay, well, since people are kind of talking about it more, maybe there were some people who were smart enough to figure out some legal ways of working around it. They're like, all right, well, we'll just make it into a law. And now there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
As far as the National Defense Authorization Act, it's definitely been affecting people. On a political standpoint, at least I think a little bit more than your average common man. That being said, it's probably going to start to affect a lot more people since they're bringing that kind of fight here to America. You know what I mean? With the recent whole Boston thing, terrorist training, stepping up here in L.A. So they're obviously planning for some sort of threat coming from America. So now they're going to be looking at Americans. And so now any one of us can be picked up as a potential terrorist threat.
Right. We only call ourselves Allah every show, so stay tuned. Okay. I think it's important to give the people before we end today's show. How does knowledge of self help us overcome our fear? And I mean, we drew up a list of things, and wanted to thank Keys for adding on. What do original people generally fear? And I would like you to all think about that as listeners at home. The ones that we came up with, black women fear control and being controlled. I can hear a whole bunch of you right now saying, that's right. The police, I don't fear the police, and neither does anyone in this room, but it's prevalent in some of our communities that the police, they're like foot soldiers, and they do change the dynamics of fear in our environment. And I wanted us all to build on this one, responsibility. Now, why is responsibility a fear among our people, and who is it that is afraid of responsibility? Is it men or women?
I think, to me personally, I think it comes from not having a knowledge of self. You lack confidence in yourself. So when you're put in a situation where you have to be there and be consistent and provide. Let's think about, say, for example, a family. You have to be there every day. You have to provide every day. That's a lot of weight for a person to carry.
365.
Exactly. It doesn't stop.
No break.
Right.
So when you lack that foundation, you're gonna grow weary of those situations, and you're gonna try to remove yourself from that situation. So that's how I see it.
I think that to add on, one thing about having knowledge of self is that first thing is knowledge, right? So that's dealing with you. One thing that I learned real quick in coming to this knowledge was that there is no mystery. So everything that does and does not happen is a direct result of me. So I think that's what a lot of people lack. And I think that kind of ties into religion. Whether you believe it or not, we're in a society to where you can say that, oh, this kind of happened because God or because the devil, right? Or because karma or, whatever kind of mystery force that you want to attribute to it. And you don't have to necessarily take full responsibility for it.
Exactly, right.
That's when you have knowledge of self, you're like, yeah, maybe there was an outside force, but I allowed that outside force to make that happen. That was my fault. That couldn't happen if I didn't allow that. So.
And I think one of the things that our people are afraid of, and I mean, again, just like you, I just came into the knowledge of myself, but I'll always share my previous experiences. I think one of the things our people are afraid of is to change. So just think about an individual who lives in quote unquote the hood or a low income area, as it's classified in sociology. And he says that he's afraid to be poor and that's why he hustles drugs. But let's go back to what I just said. You live in a poor area. How could you be afraid of being poor? You grew up in that area. So really, all BS aside, you're not going to stop selling drugs or doing all types of things to make money because you're afraid to change, because now you have a certain reputation. So I think that's one of the main reasons why many of us fall off of that hill, so to speak, because we're afraid to change our ways in the eyes of people who look up to us. And you hood rich and you the big homie, but at some point you do have to take responsibility, as was said earlier, and then commit to change. How you guys see that as far as change?
I think change is essential. I mean, ever since you were a sperm swimming up into that egg, man, you were dealing with change.
What about change?
Right. Ever since you were a young child being born, you dealt with change. So that's the science of existence.
Right. Why stop now?
Right. But with change, you should be growing and be progressing. Elevating yourself to a higher stance, not just changing for the worse.
No doubt.
Great.
Yeah. To add on to what you're saying, I always say that change is something that all living things do. All living things grow and change, right? And so if you're not changing and growing, then you're not living. So think about that one.
True indeed. And on that note, let's go ahead and close the show with the do, the read, and the view. Can we just do this diplomatically? I'll do the do, and to my left, the read, and then finally the view. So we ask that you identify one thing you are fearful of, whether it be small or big, and do it or write down all the things that you fear, then face that top fear. So if it's heights, I don't know, get into an elevator.
Go climb a mountain.
True indeed.
Yeah.
Jarul.
So you could Google some books and do some research on fear and more of the science of it, how it affects, the mind and body.
Indeed. And for the view, there's a few on top, a film on top documentaries called A Virus Called Fear. So definitely check that out.
True indeed. I would like to thank my brothers and Keys and everyone else who tuned in to view our show. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Peace to Hakim. We'll catch you next show, God.
Peace.